G'day everyone, we're back working on our Kingswood door again, and it's the last little corner of the frame. And originally I was just going to do this as a behind the scenes, but we've had so many requests on viewing some grinding and welding and things like that I thought, well, we'll do this little patch in here. These are super easy, even if you don't have any real level of flash equipment, but we can make a patch like this in the vise just as easily as anywhere else. So we'll get into it and do that. The first thing I have to do is get this bar off that we welded on here to reinforce the edge while we're repairing the frame. So we'll get that done. But first of all, we'll grab a close-up in here and we'll talk about the rust as it is and the options we have. Now we've got this bit of a rust out here, and it's where moisture sat between the skin and the frame, and we've got a hole all the way through there, one there and a little tiny one in there. Now we could just weld these up and grind them smooth, and the door would have enough structural strength in it that it would actually work. But we've got all these little pits everywhere that will hold moisture. So even just the water that would get in there from washing the car would come and just sit in these little cavities, and it would cause rust over time. So the best repair is to cut this thing right off, and we'll make our new patch, and we'll come just around the corner a bit with it, and we'll get a nice weld all the way up this edge here, across there, and it'll make a really first-class repair of it. Hopefully that'll just break off. That's just a piece of square bar, looking at it at 16mm or 5/8, and it's a good size for just doing these brace up jobs. I can always keep a bit on hand just for odd jobs and for making tools out of. A little bit of scrap material here, and we'll just quickly make a replacement patch. Very simple, easy way, just with simple hand tools. I will use my bead roller to make a nice patch later on, but you can get very good results with very simple things. So we'll do a couple of them first, and then we'll make the one we're going to use. Now, this front edge is not a straight line, it's got a little curve in it. So the easiest thing to do is to just lay a piece of material on top, mark around it, and we'll be able to cut it to the shape. And not at all prepared, I haven't got my snips ready, so I'll just grab them. Now this is a bit of 1.6mm or 16 gauge. It's zinc anneal, and I'm using the zinc sheet, not because I have gone out of my way to deliberately do it, I already have it. So rather than getting myself a sheet of cold roll just to cut a few pieces off, I've decided to make these little pieces in zinc anneal. It is a little bit harder to work with, but it will shape up using all the same techniques. So we've got our edge piece, and we're going to have a line that is that far in. So we'll just mark, and it's going to be up from the bottom a bit, a line across here. So that's where our fold's going to be, to put this little step in there. Most doors will have a little bit of a step where you've got a panel like this that ducks in, just so the moisture won't sit in there. Most likely dust has landed in here. It's been a damp day and it's sort of got stuck between the frame and the skin. You've got this little bit of a ripple here, which is probably why it sort of packs up in this little spot, because the outside skin holds it with the little pressing in it. And it started this rust area to grow. So from a restored car's point of view, not a lot you can do to change it apart from keeping your car clean. Most collector cars, once they're restored, will not see the light of day much or rain much, and so it'll be less of a problem. Thinking at the moment about how I'm going to go about this, I think I want to do it opposite to what I'd actually originally planned. So we'll put the line on this side. So what we're going to do is just put in the vise. So we want this line here, which is the high part, and this line here is slightly offset to it, which is the low area down here, to just have a little bit of a joggle in it. So if we line this one up here with our vice jaw, we can start working the line above it to actually get a little bit of a dog leg in it. So this is about as easy as it's going to get for making one of these. Now I made a couple of smooth jaws. They're not actually soft jaws. Aluminium would make a nice soft jaw, but these are just a piece of sheet metal I've hammered around the jaw, and they will clip on there just so that we don't get the jaw marks into our piece of material. So what we're going to do, this is the outside edge, we'll put that up against our jaw at the back, and have a little bit of an offset. And one of my favourite tools is a blunt cold chisel, and it's deliberately radiused in this way. We can work our piece of sheet and straight away we're already starting to get this little bit of an offset in it like that. Now working a curved surface, you just do a little bit of a time and just walk it in the vise a bit, and you're very quickly going to have the shape you want. I've been putting corners into doors since I was a teenager, and I have been using this method since then. And since I've been able to afford better equipment, I'll use this less and less. But it's always something to keep in your arsenal of skills. You never know when you might be out in the field and not have access to a machine, and you can just do something like this very quickly and easily. Righto. Now because we've got to put a shape the other way in there as well, the fact that it's distorted a little bit doesn't matter, because we can clamp that to our door and we can shape it to our door and flatten it out at the same time. So that's one really simple, easy way to make this sort of repair. The next way we'll just look at quickly and talk about, and it's a hammer form way. So if we just go to our steel bench, about as easy as it will get for a hammer form. You've only got to cut a piece of scrap material to the shape you want. You can tack it to the piece you're going to use. So we'll just have this little strip down here. We will tack it on there. We can clamp it onto our steel bench, and we can work the same thing, our blunt chisel across this edge there, and we can do compound corners. We can actually come down, go around the corner with a cut piece, just working the high side down. You can actually do it by cutting two pieces to the shape you want, and you can spot one onto the back side of your piece of material, the other side onto the top side of your piece of material, and you could even clamp it between a piece of plate and squash the shape in there, like what we did on the Commodore tailgate with the piece for the Holden Lion to fit into. So it's just unlimited ways that we can go about making this patch. But like I say, for us today, we'll run it through the bead roller, we'll get a nice shape, and then we can get into putting it on the door. Yeah, I've got this little bit of a bend across here. We'll just quickly add to it so it'll sit flat. So that will be the top, that will bend down. It's pretty easy to get yourself turned around and run something through the bead roller facing the wrong way up, and you've made a left instead of a right. So I tend to mark which piece I want to be the high side and the low side. Now we've got a little bit of a spot where it just wraps around the corner a little bit at the back there. I don't think I'll worry about putting that in there. I'll just do it with the hammer on top of the panel. We'll work afterwards. So we throw him in there like that. So this is high. So we're going to run him through the bead roller and get a little step that goes that way. Now this is the bead roller I made in the early 1990s. It took me a while to get it done, so I think it started late 80s and finished in the early 90s. It was a spare time job. Now it's made out of mostly just heavy plate welded together, so the whole thing's fabricated. I gave it a revamp a few years ago and added the pedestal to it. Originally it was a bench mount, and at the same time I put the big pedestal on it. I put the electric motor on it as well. It's got Model A Ford second gears in there to drive the shafts, and I've also got I think it's a first gear and a reverse idler in there to drop the ratio down a little bit, and that was done when it was still crank handle powered, and then I've just used that to adapt it onto the electric motor drive, and it's a pretty savage reduction, that one in there. I can't remember exactly what it is, but a lot of turns to 1, 200 to 1 or something like that. And then we've got a variable speed controller on it as well, which gives us the forwards and backwards. All of the rollers I've made myself just over the years, and I don't have a great selection. I've got, when I've needed something, I've made it, and then when I've come up with a new idea, I've usually modified them. So this one just being the tipping die, normally you sort of run it on this one here to tip an edge, but I needed to put a little dimple in some pipes, and I was actually making intercooler pipes for a truck. And I suddenly thought, if I just cut a groove in the other end of the roller, I can put the piece of 5-inch tubing over the tipping die at the top and run it through there, and it just makes a little dimple on the end of the pipe so that the hose can't blow off it, and it works really well. So most of the things I've got I have made and then modified them to do more than one job. Where have I run? It fits a little bit back, but it's fairly consistent, so we can run with that. Crashed and burned with our first attempt because we can't get the camera and Rob in the same picture at the same time. So just so you guys can see it better at home, I'm just revising how I'm going about it. So just setting this up. Yeah, that should be about right. The distance between these shoulders will determine how much of a dog leg we wind up in our sheet. So what we want is that back of out there. Normally I'll just put it through and follow a pencil line through for little short pieces like this. So that there's got to be that line. So anything that will guide a piece of metal through a machine is usually referred to as a fence. So we're just adjusting that up to there, and that puts our pencil line just on that roller there, and that will push our sheet down. So just nip him in place, and then we'll just run this through again. Yeah, where are we? Yep, we're going to, oops, too much. So close. Righto. So I'll just run it through again, and it's just shifted where we had the line from doing it with the eyeball and the camera in the way method. So that'll be close, and we should be able to work with that. So yeah, now I'm going to chuck this one. All right, we'll just use this for an example. We've run it through and I've shifted the line, but it hasn't done what I exactly want to do it. I've got another piece of material. I'll just quickly trim it to shape, and then we can poke it through again, and we'll get a really nice one this time. So we want that one as the upside. Okay, a stepped piece of metal, all done. Now we've got a little bit of a dog leg in it here, so we've got to bend him up roughly at this point here, looking through the other side of the door, and bend him back down at about that point. So that'll bend pretty easily, even with this little bit of a step in it, and that can be done easily in the vise. Now I haven't tightened the jaws up, I've just put it on the line and the angle. I'll just put him a little bend that way and a little bend the other way, and we'll try him for fit. So we need a little bit more in there, both of them need a little bit more, but we can come back off this line a little bit too, make a bit more of a radius. You ready? If you put space the folds a little bit more from where you did the previous one, if you want to make a bigger radius in the corner of the bend. I think that one needs to overbend a little bit. So we're getting there. Right, we've got that looking pretty good now. It could have a little bit more work, but like most of the things I make on top of the originals, we can clamp it through here and we can hammer it and we'll get the shape right. So that's where we'll go now. just quickly grab a couple of bits of scrap and we'll just use them to reinforce the original door edge and stop our new piece from getting any bruising from the jaws of the vice grips. Now that's pulled down nice with the vice grips. I'll just tap along this line here just to settle our piece of metal in, but we've also got to put that little bit of a dog leg on this area here, and it's only a little small turn, probably about 1/2 inch or so. So we can tap that down, and I'll just support the back of the frame with the dolly as I'm working that spot there. Another pair of vice grips could work and stop it from moving as well, and that would also work. We can also go ahead and start rolling this edge into here, and I may trim a little bit off that because I've got quite a bit of an overlap here, but we'll start moving and see what happens. Now, being this zinc anneal material, it is high tensile, so it does have quite a bit of strength to it. And for what we need, I might cut about 6 millimeters, 1/4 inch off this piece down the bottom, and from about there. Now, this being the inside of the door frame, a few hammer bruises in there won't matter. We won't see them on the other side, as long as we get our shape right, and we can just smooth these off a little bit with the grinder afterwards. Right, that's close to what we want. Okay. Now, this is the side that we'll wind up being able to see with the door open. So we'll have our lap on our skin coming in around about here. We can crisp this line up a little bit here, and we might just do that now just to make it look a little bit nicer where it wraps around the corner. Yeah, that's not too bad for a piece we've made in a few minutes. Now it's rocking on our door, so we've got a high spot right on this fold. So we put a bit of a bend in it. We need a bit of curve in here. Now it's still just in this little spot in here. Back to the vise, I think, and just pull that back a bit. Right, that's pretty close. I think we're virtually at a cut the old piece out and put the new piece in stage. Might just make this line parallel the front to back, so we'll run that across there roughly like that. And with a little bit of excess we can trim off it, but we can worry about that later. This thickness of material makes the snippers work a bit. Alright, get him in place. Good scribe line. Because this has got to drop in, I've got to cut this line exactly in line and this one exactly in line, and then as our piece drops into the being in line with the original door frame, where we've marked this line here is going to be a little bit too high. So generally when I take them out I will drop it down by a little bit, but usually I'll adjust the fit on the new piece by just trimming it as we go and dropping it into the panel. So we'll cut some bits out and let's get the new piece set in place. Okay, how are we looking? Right, so we're still very high on this bottom edge here, so that's going to have to come down a good couple of millimetres anyway, so we might just grab the grinder and cut a bit more out of there. So we've got to come down from that point there all the way through. Alright, that one there lines up on the bottom, still pivoting on this point in here. So you can cut that down in the middle, getting close. We're going to have to roll our edge in here a little bit more, but we've still got a bit of material to come out. Once we curl it, it's going to want to stand this up and lift it up a little bit. And then we can get our line here to line up exactly. That one there to line up exactly. So if I give myself a little bit of room in here, I can get the top welded and the bottom welded, and then I can just hammer this in with the hammer and dolly to butt the two edges together and get a good weld on there. It's always a dilemma which side to weld. Now I'll always say this, and I've said it plenty of times before, always weld the side that's the easiest to grind. So when we're looking at this, it's not going to make a lot of difference, but we do want this inside frame area to be free from any little spots that'll hold moisture. So I'll definitely get the weld across on this side, across these areas here. I may weld that side on the outside, I'm not sure yet. I've got this hinge plate in the way here to get in the way of actually getting a nice weld there, so that's probably the way we'll go, but it's probably going to be a bit one side and a bit the other side. So just looking at what we've got to do, I think pretty much just a little bit more off everywhere through this edge here. Okay, that just sits in there quite nicely now. Still think it's going to just a smell more. Definitely this corner's got to have a bit off it. I've got a 60 grit Cubitron disc on here today, and I'm using the angle grinder just as a bit of an experiment over the air tools, and but it's working well, I'm enjoying it. Righto, we might just weld that in there. This metal's been sandblasted and primed. It's only got a thin layer of super etch on it, so it will weld quite happily through that with no big dramas. But I'll put 2 clamps on and then we can start welding it. It's got our little line lined up on the inside. Now we've wound up with a hole just in this corner where I've ripped too much out, but it's 1.6mm thick, so it's 16 gauge. That'll weld up easy as looking at it, so I'm not worried about that at all. And this edge here is a little bit high, so I might just tap that down a little bit before I start welding it. Now if we wind up with this edge in here being too tight, I can just put the recip saw blade in there and saw through it to create a little bit of room. But we'll experiment as we go on that one. Always make sure your welding clamp goes onto a good clean piece of metal. A lot of current is lost by a bad connection on the earth clamp. So I've got spots here that I've ground off, but there's a bit of frame on the inside where I've ground that, so I'll clip it onto there. And that will ensure a good electrical connection for the earth. And just set the welder for the thickness of the material we're using. Now with 0.6 wire, it's fairly important to keep an eye on your welding cable and make sure that it's pretty much in a straight line. Otherwise the wire can bunch up in there and not want to feed out. And the other trick with 0.6 wire is only have enough tension on your feed rollers inside the welder to let the wire feed out while you're welding. So if you're finding you're welding, if the rollers are set at the right tension, if you wind up with a tight loop in the handpiece cable, you can look at that down there, and you pull that tight as you're working, it should actually stop the wire feeding out. to have the correct tension. Otherwise you run the risk of the wire just bunching up next to the rollers and not wanting to push through, and then you've got to strip it all out and feed the wire back through. So just be aware of that, that you only need enough tension to make the wire feed through when everything's working perfectly. So we will get a bit of hot glue on here. The most important thing is we line up this line through here, where we've put the little fold in it, so that's going to be visible in a straight line on the other side of the door. Now, it's not super critical, but it's good practice for other areas, because on this particular car, the hinge is going to be behind it. You will never see this. But if you do all your work to this standard, when you're trying to do something that's very important from the outside that you're going to see every time you walk up to the car, you're going to be in the habit of making sure that all your little lines line up and everything's perfect when you put it together. So we've got this line here perfectly, that line there's perfect. This area of the piece of plate's a little bit higher than that, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spot this together in here, so I'll get a good bit of weld from the vice grip out to that first line, and I can weld this piece in here properly as well, and then we can start working this edge here, smoothing it all out and then welding it as we go. So let's melt it together. Okay. And when we're welding near an edge, weld from the edge, not to the edge. So now I've got that stabilised. I'll just get rid of the clamps and I can weld in onto the weld I've put there before. And we're done there. Righto. Right, so that's got that area there nice and straight. So I can weld from here just out to my weld there. Now this being thicker material, I can weld it quite comfortably for that distance there in one pass. So there shouldn't be any worries there at all. Righto. So that's sitting in there really happy. Right, I've got a spot in there, about there to about there. I can weld that. Just working this to get my two edges sitting on top of each other. Once again, thickness of the material and how close I am to the edges just make it a little bit difficult, but not impossible. So as I thought, as I've rolled this edge over, it's pulled down and it's actually pushing the frame out the way. So I'll put my little recip saw in there and we'll just run all the way down it, and that'll just open, make a little gap between the two, and I can finish dressing it into shape and getting it all lined up, and they should be back butting together again, hopefully. Alright, let's give them a little bit of room to play with. That's better. Okay. Alright, I'm going to say that's good enough all the way through. We'll just get a series of tacks on it, and then we'll have to just adjust it again probably, and then weld him up. Got some really good weld penetration through this join here. See the beater weld that's come all the way through from the other side. That's from this side, that little corner bit, but this was from the other side all the way out to there. And these ones here were from the other side. It's what we're looking for, a weld that we've got to grind both sides off. Just welding through and onto the tacks I've made before. Let's grab another one just in here now. And because of the shape of the panel where we're working, it's close to a corner, it's quite thick metal, we can go pretty heavy with the weld, and we know we've got no real risk of it distorting just because the shape of the panel's really holding it in there. I've got to work our replacement patch a little bit from the other side because we are lower than the original here. So we've got the original panel where it wraps around there. My panel's going a little bit across the corner there. So once we get him welded through here, I can flip him over, sit the dolly in here, and then work that bottom edge out to bulge it out a bit to make it match the original panel. So what I'm aiming for is our usual trick, a no-fill repair. We want to be able to grind this off and it's ready to paint. We can just go with a high build primer, sand that, and we're ready to put colour on there and we can't see our repair. That's what we're aiming for. It'll work. At this stage, I'm just going to let it cool a little bit and get some of this heat out of the panel, and I'll probably give it a minute, minute and a half, something like that. My usual rule of thumb is if you can just sort of hold your hand on it without wanting to cause blisters and things like that, if you can put it there and sort of hold it for a second or two, it's got enough heat in it that you can keep going. The heat is our friend here. It helps with the weld penetration. It's not going to cause any problems. Welding into preheated metal is actually a good thing. So once we've got it cool enough, we'll check our alignment on these laps, but that feels pretty good there now, and we'll be able to get this piece welded through here, and then it'll be time to turn it over. The other benefit of a bit of heat in the panel, if we're working with thicker material like this, and where I've got to work this corner around here, well, hot metal is soft metal. It's going to make it easier for us to shape it into the right shape. So don't panic about the heat. Deb just raised an interesting point. She was asking me whether it was absolutely critical to spend all this time in preparation and getting both our edges of our metal butted together. Well, if we look at this piece here, we've got the door hinge right beside it. We have got a thicker section in the door which has got to support the whole weight of the door throughout its lifetime and all the cycles of the door opening and closing. I also want to put no filler in this, so I want a repair that's going to be ground back to absolutely flush and it's ready to paint. So if we take two pieces of metal of the same thickness, so it's 1.6 millimeters through, and we put them together and they're not perfectly lined up, we've got like a step in there, and we think, oh yeah, that's fine, I can still grind that down there because I can't see through it. But if we grind the high side back down to match the low side, we might only be left with about 0.4 of a millimetre of material left there. And then if we look at the other side and say, oh, there's this horrible lip on the other side, and I grind that one as well, well, we've suddenly got a structural section on the door that's been brought down to wafer thin material, and we run the risk of it splitting, or if the car's in an accident, it tears or something like that and causes other problems. So if you want to butt weld and grind it to perfection, you cannot be grinding the parent material around away either side of your weld. So we've got to take the time to get it just right before we weld it. So that's why I spend a lot of time feeling the join and little taps in there to get them to sit down. Now this one here just wants a little tap just on the top edge there to line him back up again before I weld it. And that's all it took. So that's fitted in there really nicely now. I've just got that corner left to do, and our patch is in. It's also interesting to note the door's been forced against a rusted up hinge at some stage, and there could be a little fracture in it there, but we can see where the edge of the hinge is actually pulled into the door, and the same back the other way, there's a little bit of a crease there. So I might work those a bit before I put the door back on the car. I'll probably have to take the latch plate out of the back, like the piece with the nut holes in it. And then I can get the hammer and dolly in there and just smooth this area through here, but I really think there will be a fracture just in there and just in there. So, another job to do on our door.
What will you do with the fracture?
Weld it, grind it, make it happy. So now it's welded and stabilised, I can actually get stuck into it with the hammer and really hit it. Quickly move the piece of metal. That actually feels pretty good. Just that lower corner just wants a little bit tapping out the way. Now because the other side's going to be an easy weld, easy grind, sorry, I could weld it from there, but I can also weld it from this side and just grind the material off that pokes through. Still think it wants a little bit more in this area. Alright, we'll give that a go. And easy as that, we've got it filled. Now when it comes to the insides of the doors, we don't have to be super fussy with grinding all our welds up and making them pretty. The only areas that I really like to do it is where the weld will hold moisture. So if it creates a little dam wall or something like that and the pool will form inside the door, I will grind that away to make the panel smooth and the water can flow off there. So anywhere like along the bottom face in here and coming up close to the frame here, I'll make sure all that's smooth. If there's a lump of weld like in this area here, that doesn't really matter at all, so I'll leave that. But we've got to grind these areas smooth where our skin's going to go on there from this side, and the same thing, this little puddle thing here, it's going to flow out, but if we've got a little area that's smooth, that any moisture that might be here might want to just run down here and out through this drain hole, we can't block that off with a lump of weld, so we've got to get rid of that. Now, that's the plate for the hinge to bolt to. It's just got the threads in it. You've got these legs here that just hold them on, so it's only a matter of bending them out the way, and you can get that out the way. And there is quite a bend there where the hinge has actually bent the door frame. So at this stage, we can get in there and put the dolly on the inside, and we can either do it now or we can do it after we take the skin off. It's not going to make much difference. So we'll get this ground up for now, and then we might look at this in a later video. So all good. We will be able to do a really good grinding video where we're enjoying the skin, because we're going to have the full length of the skin to grind. But areas like this, I just bring them down steady. I've worked the full length of this piece here, and then I've come back and I've started finishing the part right at the end. So once this is finished, I'll start working my way along the rest of the weld. But you can see I've brought it down. I'm just starting to touch the parent metal there, so I am smooth this side. I've still got a high spot on there because I've got a shadow this side, so I can lean into this other side a little bit. I'm still a little bit high there as well. So that, for a skin to go over the top, that would be fine. We could leave it like that, but I'll push it a little bit further. The other thing is, if you sit in one spot and you're working it hard with a lot of pressure, you will create heat. You can get it to the point where the metal will turn blue from the heat. That's just way too hot. We never want to see that. So if you're seeing things like that, just stop and leave it for a minute, come back once it's cooled down and grind it a bit more. But the best thing about the grind, if you take it steady, it's a gentle heat that goes out into your welded area, and it will relieve stresses. So we'll knock down the rest of this and then we'll have another look at it, and we'll just come back and see how we're going with it all. Now that's as good as it needs to be. That's a smooth weld. We've got no step in our panel or anything like that. And that's brought it up a treat. I've only just touched the parent metal either side of my weld, so I've taken the bead of weld away and we're ready to move on to the next piece down into this corner here. Now always be wary of the rotation of a disc, particularly with this type of disc like that, because if you're leaning it this way and the rotation's like this, it will bite into it, it will tear the disc and it will flick the grinder out the way just like that. So you would have noticed that I would have had the grinder just tipped on a bit of an angle, and I'm working on the outward bound part of the disc and it's running off the edge of the piece of sheet metal, and where it's coming into contact with the sheet was further up. So we're working it like this. The disc was running this way. There's no way that this paper disc can actually bite any of the metal and tear it to shreds and spit it out, do ourselves damage, do stuff around the shed damage and things like that. So always watch the rotation. I've actually got a tiny little bump still there, just on that corner there. If I run my finger across it, I can feel it and we can see it where the little shadow is there. So I can just hit that a little bit more and just take that away, and we've got this piece done. Easy as that. Easy as that, all smoothed out now. All right, let's flip him over and have a look at the other side. Now there is a little bit of a depression next to the weld. We've also got a spot there where I haven't got full weld penetration, so I want to just weld that from this side, just across that little bit of a ramp there, and there's a spot just in there I want to weld again too. So I tend to nitpick the welds as I'm grinding. And a bit over here. Righto. just with the way I have welded it and shaped the metal, I've got a little bit of a V on the weld. So I'll just correct that now with the hammer and dolly and just make it into a gentle curve. That's better. Righto. So all we need to do, we'll flip the door over and we'll see if we can grind this area up here with the grinder. Just a little bit round the back I can't get to with this grinder. Got a little spot in the corner here, I'll see if I can get done with this. Tiniest little bit I can't get into. Well, I'm thinking that's just about good enough. We've got no real big tool marks in it anywhere. We've got a little bit in there I'd like to get rid of, but that is pretty much a no-fill repair. It's still a little bit high just in this corner. So just another crack at it with this disc. All right, that last little bit. of smoothing in there. Well, there you have it, people. Start to finish, we've made a repair, we've welded it in, we've ground it up. Now this is all the sort of stuff that you can do at home, because the reality is I showed you a way that we can make this repair patch with very simple tools. We've welded it in with a MIG welder. Anyone can afford to buy a MIG welder these days. And a couple of different grinding options. Used the angle grinder to get most of it finished. Finished it with a couple of finer discs, a finer disc and the belt on the sander. And we have got a repair that is ready for paint. So all I've got left to do in this area on this door is just correct this little bit of damage where the hinge was, which is going to be a few blows with the hammer. We'll get that sorted, and then we're ready to move on our door, and the next job we'll be doing is welding that skin on, and that's the bit everyone's been waiting for. I'm Rob Teal. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Stay safe. We'll talk to you soon.